I now call Ash Regan to speak to Amendment 112 and other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And just for the Chamber's information, I don't intend to to move 112, but I will move 113. So one of the roles of a government is obviously to protect its people, and the current GRA regime, as we all know, was put into place to ensure that legal recognition to reflect that. And trans people are protected, rightly so, under the Equality Act provision on gender reassignment. So the existing regime is fully compliant with human rights law. And a recent High Court judicial review in Northern Ireland ruled that the GRA regime strikes a fair balance between the needs of the applicant and the community as a whole. The bill before us today, in my view, does not strike that balance. It does not protect the rights of everyone. Instead, it introduces a hierarchy of rights where women's rights are demoted. And I say that not to be provocative or to be unnecessarily controversial, but because that is the only conclusion that can be drawn from a review of the interactions between these two pieces of legislation, I think demonstrated by the quite long debate we've had on that point prior to this. And the Court of Session ruling last week, in my view, has now put this beyond doubt. Self-ID does grant new rights, as it will grant a GRC to almost anyone who wants one. And this is not just an administrative change. This is not just a change in process that has no real-world effect. There are currently around 600 GRC holders in Scotland, which is quite a small number, and the government expects this to increase tenfold to 6,000. This will grant somewhere in the region of, although we're not entirely sure, 5,000 or more people who are, and the most important point about this, not currently eligible for a GRC, and also the rights that are conferred by it. Now, these people may well be trans. However, my strong contention is that not all of them will be. I'll give way.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank the member for giving way. When she says that the people, the 5,000, over 5,000 people are not currently eligible, does she accept that actually there will be people in that group that are eligible but have chosen not to go through the process because it is demeaning and humiliating?
Ash Regan. Excuse me, Ms Regan. I appreciate that there's great interest and that those observing from the gallery are very interested in the proceedings, but it is the case that we would ask that members are not applauded from the gallery. Thank you. Ms Regan.
Actually, I do accept that point. There probably will be some, probably a small number, who've maybe chosen for whatever reason that they don't want to apply for a GRC. But I still think the general contention is fair, that this opens the process up to a vast number of people who would not currently be eligible under the normal scheme, with the safeguarding that I think that entails. And I also take issue with the point that the member raises, that all trans people think that the current process is intrusive or degrading in some way. That is not, I'm sure some people do feel like that, but that is not how some trans people have described it to me. And one GRC holder said to me that she was completely happy with the process and indeed felt that the longer process was entirely appropriate considering the profundity of the change that was being undertaken. So, if we are saying that we think that some of the people that are applying for GRC may not be trans, we're not going to be able to tell. We've had a debate on that already about how we would be able to tell if there were some fraudulent applications or not. And this now creates a situation where members of a dominant group in society can now self-identify into the rights of an oppressed group. And this is absolutely unprecedented. Now, my amendments in this group won't resolve this problem. And they won't put this beyond legal doubt, I don't think. I tried to lodge a number of other amendments, and I was advised by the Parliament that amendments that altered the effect of a GRC were inadmissible, and we've had some debate on that already. But I think that as the group of people that can now access the GRC is so expanded, and that I think we're all admitting that it may be open to being abused, that in not allowing this Parliament to make changes to the effect of a GRC, that we are now being asked to legislate in such a way that I don't think can possibly lead to good law. And therefore, it's my strong belief that many of the amendments that we are discussing today will not materially alter the issues that we are all facing. And I also contend that despite the information that's been presented to the committee that states' obligation to protect vulnerable rights holders was not given enough consideration. And that is, of course, a contention that has been backed up by Reem Al-Salem, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And it's claimed that the impact on women and girls had been assessed and that there was no impact. And I strongly disagree with that. I have searched and I cannot find the analysis that addresses and evaluates the impact from the context of women and girls as vulnerable rights holders. And that is consistent with other jurisdictions where the data on the impact on women is not being collected. In Ireland, when self-ID law was being reviewed, the impact on women was considered to be out of scope. But if you don't collect the data, you will not be able to assess the impact. And on that basis alone, I believe we should not be proceeding. There are many examples around the world of violent and sex offenders in women's prisons, now, of course, including here in Scotland. Examples of flashing and voyeurism in women's single-sex spaces, and women self-excluding from services in places where self-identification into women's single-sex spaces has introduced. And I assert that for those who are looking, the impact is there to see. And women's single-sex spaces are important. And the issue is whether, of course, people are male and not whether they are trans. Male people, as a group, are a risk to women. I see the Greens are sighing at that reference. But male people, as a group, are a risk to women, and I think we all accept that. So the ability to exclude people of the opposite sex, if they hold a GRC, I think will now be impossible on grounds of sex. And inevitably, making use of these exemptions will be much more complicated and it will be much more off-putting to organisations, many of which are quite small, some are charities and so on. So this bill may not spell it out, but I believe that we shouldn't delude ourselves. It comprehensively undermines the single-sex exemptions. And we're being conditioned to accept male-bodied people in women's single-sex spaces. Why? Who does that benefit? And I would say to my fellow parliamentarians that it boils down to this. Do you think women will be more or less safe as a result of this law? And if you have any doubt at all that it will make women and girls less safe, then you cannot vote for it.
We will suspend for a moment. I would just remind
as parliamentarians, the public expect us to engage critically with the arguments. They expect us to balance different viewpoints and rights, and they expect us to ask the hard questions and understand what we are voting for. And it is a huge responsibility, and it cannot be delegated. The people of Scotland are watching, and we often say that we use legislation to send a message, and I believe that's true. I believe that is sometimes what we're doing. But I'm very, very sad to say that the message today that's been sent out to women and girls in Scotland is that you don't matter. So I'm going to vote as if women do matter, and I'll be voting against the bill.
Thank you.